For 500 years, the Catholic-Protestant split has been one of the most significant stories in Western history, affecting the spiritual lives of billions of people. But what if a single logical solution, rather than a complex history and doctrine, holds the key to healing the divide? Most people continue to struggle with this schism and its complicated history, but this video will help you learn why it's happening from a logical perspective and how to resolve it permanently. As a convert with graduate degrees and publications in philosophy and theology, I want to share with you the discovery of this new and straightforward logic that has brought me peace. This video is crafted for those of you committed to following the logic wherever it leads. And if I had only one opportunity to share my thoughts with you, this is what I would say. For every person who watches this video, as indicated by the view count below, I am offering an individual prayer for each of you. This is not only an abstract debate for theologians, but also a personal one. It affects how we worship and ultimately our relationship with God, which is certainly true for me. For example, in their disagreement over Holy Communion, Protestants claim that Catholics are committing idolatry by worshipping what's only a piece of bread. But from a Catholic standpoint, Protestants are missing the most intimate encounter with Christ possible on earth, or maybe even denying him. Some argue that being correct or incorrect on this topic could determine one's salvation. I realized that if we don't work hard to fix this rift, we won't help each other find the truth. I want to invite you to help each other and the church be closer to Christ by looking at a single, powerful, logical proof that changed my mind. This has also convinced some devout and intelligent Christians I've spoken with, but almost no one knows of this evidence. Let's put our emotions aside and examine the structure of the argument together, logically, step by step. We must work together to revive the church. This topic presents many issues to consider. Ask yourself, am I willing to follow the logic wherever it leads, even if it contradicts my feelings? I hope you say yes and commit to it until the end of this video. To understand the deep fissures that divide Catholic and Protestant thought, we should look beyond individual doctrines in isolation and focus on the primary cause of the division. I propose that the most fundamental disagreement, the one that gave rise to all the other important ones, concerns a single, powerful question. What content is revealed by God? After all, what God says goes. Answering this question can clarify the doctrinal differences between Catholics and Protestants as they stem from disagreements about what God has revealed. For example, Catholics and Protestants read different versions of the Bible, leading to contrary doctrines based on their Bible's compilation. One of these doctrinal differences lies in Protestantism's belief that their Bible is inspired by God, holding it as the sole infallible rule of faith. This doctrine is called sola scriptura. However, Catholics do not believe this and regard sola scriptura as only one among many contested doctrines. To thoughtfully ask what content God has revealed and arrive at an accurate, sensible answer, we must think logically. We will set up the problem using logic and then solve it in 2 stages. I've summarized the core argument in a PDF linked in the description for easy reference, so you don't need to take notes. For our purposes, we will stipulate and treat the terms inspired and revealed as synonyms. To adopt a logically broad definition, when we say something is inspired, we mean that it is content revealed by God and that God speaks to us through it. Now bear with me for the next part. It will make sense by the end of this video. Ultimately, we want to arrive at the true proposition X is inspired or revealed. This proposition has a few logical terms. 1. The subject, the thing that X refers to. 2. The predicate, or the meaning of the term inspired or revealed. 3. The evidence, for or against this proposition. Don't worry if these terms feel abstract. All I mean is we need to know exactly what we're talking about, the thing, what we are saying about it, the claim, and why we think the claim is true, the evidence. Let's detail these 3 logical elements. This structure is something students of logic are already familiar with. This is an advanced concept. If you're just starting to explore formal logic, feel free to slow down these steps in this video. but understanding this is a game changer. First, let's look at the subject, which we call X. In logic, to say X is inspired requires knowing exactly what X is. Imagine if I told you all dufels are blue. You would immediately ask, what is a dufel? If I can't define a dufel or tell you which items in a room are dufels, my assertions are useless. In our context, if we claim that X is inspired, we must define exactly which things count as X. Is it a sentence? Is it a page? Is it 66 books? Is it 73 books? Is it an institution? Is it a tradition? Or is it a person that is inspired? Unless we can justify the definition of the contents of X, the subject, we can't logically claim that it is inspired. If the subject does not appropriately refer to something specific, the statement is untrue or meaningless. Second, we need to consider the predicate, which is the assertion we are making about X. When we say that something is inspired or revealed, we need to understand what these terms mean. Are inspired or revealed words that are literally and inherently true? In other words, if God says something is right or wrong, does that mean it really is right or wrong? Or, as some theologians argue, is inspiration or revelation just a religious feeling or experience of the divine that is beyond words or positive description? Put differently, revealed words aren't true or false. It's just the feeling of the divine that matters. All that this boils down to is that how the predicate is defined, the meaning of revelation and inspiration dramatically alters the proposition. So we need to know exactly what we're talking about, the thing, and what we're saying about it, the claim. Now let's discuss why we may think the claim about the thing is true, the evidence. Finally, the evidence. We need sufficient evidence to support the claim that something is inspired or revealed. The logical default is to presume that something is not inspired by God until there is strong evidence to the contrary. Why? Because the world is full of contradictory religious beliefs and experiences, and logically, they can't all be true. If we reject most religious claims as uninspired, but accept a claim that we like as divinely inspired without unique, strong evidence, then we commit the special pleading logical fallacy. This fallacy occurs when we apply a general rule to others. Their texts are not inspired, but grant ourselves an unjustified exception, but mine is. To avoid this logical error, we must start from a neutral, detached position. The burden of proof rests on the one who claims that something is divinely inspired. Without strong evidence, we presume that something is not divinely inspired. Divine inspiration, like a miracle, is an exception to the natural order. Thus, we assume that an idea is man-made, unless we can be certain that it originated from God. The crux of the issue is this. If a Christian framework fails to logically validate which words are inspired by God, it cannot logically validate the revealed doctrines that rely on those words. Now that we have set up our logical line of thought, let's move on to the two final stages of the solution. The first stage is to clarify what kind of evidence can support the claim that something is divinely revealed or inspired. As we've just discussed, evidence is important because it proves the relationship between the subject and the predicate of the proposition. Let's consider the types of evidence people typically use. First, intelligent people typically use empirical science as solid evidence to support their arguments in various contexts. In this case, however, using the empirical sciences will be a logical mistake known as a category error, because the empirical sciences cannot verify whether something is supernaturally inspired. The scientific method requires measuring repeatable, observable phenomenon in the material world, and scientific theories must be falsifiable with empirical evidence. However, supernatural occurrences are irreproducible in the material world, and theories about the supernatural are empirically unfalsifiable. Supernatural phenomenon have immaterial causes. Accordingly, empirical science cannot, in principle, test or verify supernatural reality, and God and his miraculous acts are supernatural phenomena. For example, scientists cannot apply a special chemical to the pages of the Quran or the King James Bible, supposing that the chemical will turn blue if it tests positive for God's inspiration. To verify a supernatural authority, you need supernatural evidence. The tool must match the category. Second, some assume that the historical reception of a book or an idea in Christianity indicates divine inspiration. However, Regardless of one's denominational affiliation, many heresies have been and continue to be popular. Appealing to historical popularity to discern truth is a logical fallacy known as the ad populum fallacy. Reality and truth are not a democracy, however popular an idea may be. This is not to say that some religious texts are not very wise for many people, or that they're not used by God to help us grow. God can use insightful or wise texts to help us without inspiring them, so these texts do not need to be inspired to be edifying, wise, or used by Him in miraculous ways. Apart from science and history, there's a third way to find evidence of inspiration. Someone like God, who knows the supernatural reality firsthand, may verify and testify what is or is not inspired. In other words, God testifying to us what is inspired is our best evidence for discerning what is revealed or inspired. No other evidence is sufficient for the task. As Aquinas argued, without revelation, truths about God, reachable by reason, will be known, quote, only by a few, and that after a long time, and with the admixture of many errors. Without God identifying Himself, perhaps through a miracle, and telling us what is inspired, we naturally presume that the text in question is uninspired theological speculation and human opinion. It might even be divinely favored theological speculation, containing rich insights about spiritual closeness to God, or very wise human opinion about the divine. But that does not mean that it is inspired. This concludes the first stage of our analysis. To briefly summarize how we got here, we began by identifying the core disagreement between Catholics and Protestants as a dispute over what content is actually revealed or inspired by God. Before that question can be answered, we established that three logical conditions must be met. First, we must identify the thing, or X, that is supposedly inspired, and second, we must identify what the term inspired means. We also determined that strong evidence is required to believe such a claim. Consequently, we logically presume that something is uninspired without strong evidence. After considering potential sources of evidence, we found that empirical science and historical popularity are insufficient, leaving only God's personal testimony as the only sufficient evidence to establish inspiration. Now, you act as the judge. Based on the evidence and logical framework we just reviewed, apply the standard of proof to the second and final stage. This final stage will move quickly because these facts are largely indisputable, or are the logical implications of our discussion so far. I've included a visual for each step of the argument in this video. Feel free to pause at any time to dive deeper into each visual for additional thoughts. Here are the first 4 steps. 1. To justify the claim that the Protestant Bible is inspired in its entirety, Protestants would need to show where God has communicated in history, quote, this collection of books is inspired, end quote. For this proposition to be meaningful, the exact collection of books would need to be identified in God's statement, and the meaning of inspiration would need to be defined. 2. Without a credible claim from God that the entire Protestant Bible is inspired, we should assume that not all of it is inspired by God. We'd assume that some or all of the Protestant Bible is just spiritual speculation or theological opinion, even if enlightening. 3. There is no clear point at which God identifies the exact Protestant collection of 66 books as inspired in a way that meets the logical conditions we've established. The Protestant Bible doesn't claim that each book is inspired by God. This claim comes from outside the Bible. Therefore, both God and the Protestant Bible do not clearly claim that the Protestant Bible is inspired in its entirety. 4. Many core Protestant doctrines logically presuppose the inspiration of the Protestant Bible for it to be an infallible rule of faith. If Protestants cannot logically defend the inspiration of the Protestant Bible, they cannot reasonably justify core Protestant doctrines. Therefore, the Protestant framework lacks the logical mechanism to justify its Bible. Without that justification, fundamental doctrines such as sola scriptura, the sufficiency of Scripture, the perspicuity of Scripture, the analogy of faith, the closed canon, and many other doctrines are logically indefensible. In sum, this is what we have just proven in the first 4 steps. Protestantism lacks both the clarity and the evidence to justify the belief that the Protestant Bible is inspired. The logical implication of this conclusion is that several core Protestant doctrines, such as sola scriptura, the sufficiency of Scripture, and others, are logically indefensible. Now let's contrast Protestantism with Catholicism in these last few steps. 5. In contrast to Protestantism, the magisterium of the Catholic Church claims that God testifies through it, and attempts to justify this claim by appealing to miracles as evidence that God speaks through it. Based upon this claim, there is also the assertion that its Bible is inspired. The Catholic Church articulates the inspiration of its Bible by specifying the collection of books it considers inspired. It also provides clear definitions of what is meant by the word inspiration. 6. All in all, it may be debatable whether the Catholic Church has sufficiently justified its claim based on history and miracles that God testifies through it. Still, at least the Catholic Church can satisfy the basic logical requirements for claiming the inspiration of its Bible, whereas the Protestant framework is wholly logically indefensible. My claim here is comparatively modest. Even if you think the Catholic case fails, at the bare minimum, it has a coherent structure for how God can testify to a canon. Protestantism, in contrast, doesn't seem to provide even that minimal structure. Number 7. Therefore, core Protestant doctrines are logically indefensible, whereas Catholic doctrines at least have a chance. The logically valid form of this argument is provided as an attachment linked in the description below. I end this video by reiterating that the Catholic-Protestant divide is easier to mend with this new logical argument. When I contemplated the Catholic-Protestant divide, and I asked the question, what content is revealed by God? That's when I became unsettled and brought that unrest to prayer. Subsequently, I intellectually and spiritually felt myself begin to convert to Roman Catholicism from Protestantism. As someone who once defended sola scriptura, I don't say these words lightly. My goal isn't to beat Protestants or score debating points. I aim for us to be united as God's people, to stand before Christ having thoughtfully loved one another in truth. This video makes a straightforward claim. Protestantism does not provide a logical justification for its Bible, while Catholicism presents a mechanism that can be evaluated. If you're wrestling with these questions, you're not alone. Many sincere Christians across traditions are quietly asking the same question. On what basis do we trust that this collection of words is God's voice? After thinking this through with me, some of you may still have lingering confusion or doubt. Please share your perspectives in the comments if you'd like me to create another video to address any confusion or objections. Feel free to invite others to join the conversation. To help heal and bridge the Protestant-Catholic divide, please make others aware of this video. Share it with a select few so that we can unite as one church and community under God.